interested. Okay, it's now 4:30 on July 26th. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Could I have a motion, please, concerning our agenda?
I move approval of the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed, the same sign. That motion carries. Could I have a similar motion, please, with regard to the consent agenda?
I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign.
We probably should have said something about the additional agenda item tonight.
It's just a supplement.
The supplement. Should we have said something about that when he approved it or not? We'll assume that.
I think it's off consent, so,
Okay, thank you.
yeah, you're fine.
That brings us to customers to be heard. I see that we have a new general manager tonight. Are there any recognitions you would like us to discuss?
None that I'm aware of.
Okay. Any customers to be heard? Seeing none. That brings us down to old business. Is there any old business, Mr. General Manager?
No, Mr. President.
You guys listen to this. Yeah, well, he didn't mean it. Okay. Reports of the City Council. Heidi, what do you have to report?
Well, let's see here. I did pass on to our interim city manager that MPS staff would like to be included on planning projects to make sure that you're at the table when any major street improvements are being planned. So hopefully they are reaching out to you and Travis. Congratulations on your bond hearing. That interest rate was unbelievable, but it was also in part, well, due to your financial indicators all being so very positive. So I wanted to be sure to congratulate MPS, staff, commission.
Staff does a great job.
For running such a phenomenal operation. And I think that's all I've got.
If I can bring something to your mind, Heidi, I had an interesting discussion today with our legal counsel concerning some conversations that are going back and forth, and Chris, you can help me with this if I mess it up too badly, about some property ownership rights and some easements and some requests being made by the city.
Yep.
Where are we at in terms of moving toward having a final resolution of the so-called property policy that we've talked about so many times before?
I will defer to Ralph and Dave.
You know, I've never heard her say that before.
No. So I think we need to meet again. It totally fell off my radar, so my apologies for that.
I don't think it fell off anybody's radar. I would say that summer vacations and summer schedules have caused issue with us getting together, but
Well, it seems there's some issues that are cropping up that we should probably discuss our way through. And so to that extent, having that policy is again becoming an issue that we should discuss.
And that's, I thought you were going to bring up the sale of some city-owned property in Macara that has MPS easements on it. And the city is looking to get some of those easements relaxed a bit. I think Travis is well aware of what's going on, and he's working with Cindy Graffio. And
Yeah, I don't know if that's what John was asking me about. Is that it, or is it?
no, I don't think so, but it just reminded me that is an issue that we talked about last night at City Council.
Okay. Well, maybe you can straighten me out, Travis.
I don't know if I can
wish
do
you
that.
luck with that.
So what Heidi is referring to, and Travis Schmidt, electrical engineering manager, Cindy came to me a couple weeks ago, right before the 4th or right after the 4th, about some property right across the street from our Opportunity substation that they have a pending sale on. And what they're looking for is us to relax our easements. I am working with our legal counsel, John Bolger, to talk through some of those scenarios and the logistics of that, because of the way the easement is set up. It does encumber a pretty good portion of the land. Joe and myself have talked about that a little bit, and we've also talked with Bill too, in trying to figure out where we're comfortable with our easement line being, if we do reduce that a little bit from what it currently is. But we want to make sure we're covered and protected both insurance-wise and everything else. So I am working with Cindy on that and John Bolger as well, so we're clearing that up.
Okay, well, I don't need to know the facts and circumstances surrounding the proposed acquisition. But I'm assuming that when we obtained whatever easement we obtained, there was a reason why that easement had the parameters that it does.
Correct.
And so have things changed to make our future use of that easement area such that we can reduce or relax, as you say, the easement area?
Yep, so the way it's set up is we usually get 100 to 110 feet of easement, and normally we place our transmission line dead center of that footage, whether it's 50 feet from either side or 55 feet from either side. The way it's currently set up, because there was other parties that own the properties to the north of that transmission line area, the city gave us a 110-foot easement on all the properties in that Makara area where it runs right next to that drainage ditch. And where the line is located currently is about 25 to 30 feet south of that property line, or in that easement area. And so we've got about 80 feet or so south of that. So we're looking to reduce that easement area just so that we have like 50 to 55 feet south of it to protect us.
Would I be correct in assuming that this will be an issue that will be brought to our attention as you get closer?
Correct. Yep, we need to figure out how we handle that first through John, and then that'll be brought to you.
Okay, and obviously, the questions we're going to have are going to be similar in nature to the one I just posed in terms of what future use do we have, because we have a nasty tendency to go back and revise things, i.e. everything going west of us.
Yep.
And so from that standpoint, we have to make sure that we absolutely have no other use for that property if we're going to reduce it in size.
Correct, understandable.
Okay?
In the meantime, if Casey could just triangulate a meeting for us, I think we probably ought to be getting back together so that we can resume that conversation and get that, get some policy recommendations together
Right.
for both groups.
And my reason for even asking about it is I just think it's important that we have some kind of a simplified policy that makes sense and we're done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody have any questions for Travis? Okay, thank you, Travis.
You're welcome.
Anybody else have any comments? Anything further? Okay. Members of the Public Service Commission, anything to report? Les?
Well, in fact, I just wanted to jump in to congratulate the staff as well on the bonds and the rating and the renewal of that rating. I was able to sit in on the conversation with Moody's and council, and it was actually really a very pleasant experience. We had our answers, we had our numbers. The professionalism, by everyone was outstanding. I accompanied the group a few years ago when we first got that new rating, and then I was on the phone with them this time. And it truly was a pleasure to be a part of the conversation because our staff has worked hard. They deserve the rating they got. So Nancy and your team, and Bill's not here, so we don't have to congratulate him. So Nancy and your team, good job.
Too bad for Bill. I second that, and especially given what's happening with the rating agencies lately, municipalities across the country, it speaks well of our staff, all of you.
Yeah.
I think Les was next.
I want to make a comment on Dave's comments,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
What did you comment on Dave's comment?
Yeah, so, even though we got the rating, which is fantastic, there's a couple of items that we need to watch out for, right? And the reserves are one of them. So just, it's great, fantastic, but there's a couple of things we need to really address.
And we
in the
covered
budget.
we covered reserves in a big way in that conversation. It did not go unnoticed in the conversation, and I thought we addressed it very well.
Cool. I'm done.
Are you going to have a comment on his comment or the other comment?
No.
I'll go last. Go ahead, John.
Sorry. Well, there's just more than that item noted here, their concerns. It was also the transfer amounts and how that potentially can affect ratings. So they've noted several things for us to continue to be aware of going forward.
Yep.
And a quick response to that too. We had that element on the agenda, and they brought it up. So it was in the form of a question, and I went into some some detail describing the relationship that we had as well as the relationship that we had worked out with a new agreement with the city and the working group that got together and made all that happen. And evidently, based on their response, they were satisfied with the response. Because even though we've had a couple of tough years and we haven't been able to start to move that transfer amount at all, it certainly was clear that that is our intent. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that part of the conversation with them was really very positive.
So to the extent that we are grateful for the work done by our staff, we're also equally grateful for the work of the working group and our liaisons who work with us to accomplish and move mountains. Now we can turn to you, Mr. Bach.
Are you sure everybody else is done?
You know, well, you know how they are
I'm
on
a short timer, you know.
You know how they are on this
get-
side, and
I get
I
the
try my
bottom of the
best.
list.
You only have, what, 3 more meetings?
Something like that.
You got to get it done.
I got to get it done. Last Wednesday morning at the Moorhead Business Association meeting, our guest presenter was Dennis, talking about our energy, electrical usage, and a variety of other things. Travis was there, backed him up with some of the more technical issues that were asked by the group. They asked a lot of good questions, very, very good group. Presented very well, and even said good things about the commission.
Which one?
Commission.
Can you remember what he said?
Yeah, he said that Les Bakke was probably the best commissioner up here.
Yeah. I knew there was a reason you brought it
If you're
up.
going to go that way, so will I. But the other,
One attending that morning.
you weren't there, no?
I know.
No, I know. you weren't
Obviously,
there.
so you didn't hear that part about Dave Anderson. Okay.
No, didn't hear anything about Dave Anderson. But they also brought up some questions about our water supply and a variety of things, including the water possibly coming from western North Dakota. And I did the best I could to answer them, but I'd suggest that perhaps Chris could get on the agenda for the Moorhead Business Association too, sometime in the future. It's not something we need right away, but don't you think so, Dennis? You can just nod that they had enough questions that somebody from our water division should be there, right? At least one time. So we'll arrange that for you if that's okay.
That's perfectly,
Okay.
yeah, that's great.
Anything further, members of the commission? Mr. General Manager, anything to report?
A couple items on the GM report, talk about any of them. One in particular was brought up by Commissioner Regala, I believe a couple meetings ago, and Commissioner Norman regarding change order limits for contracts and what the state statute allows. Just wanted to touch base on that one. Legal counsel did approve the supplemental agreement for Sims. There is a 25% change order limit on specially assessed projects. Sims is not a specially assessed project. However, the 25% kind of is a good guideline for publicly bid projects, and it's not it's not in our MPS purchasing policy at this time, but it's something that we generally try to follow.
I don't know if this particular commissioner would vote in favor of a 25% allowance on change orders, just so you know. But I think it's something we have to stay on top of anyway. It has been noted before in our meetings.
But this was not an automatic, this was about whether it had to be rebid, right?
Yes.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct.
Okay.
Okay. Anything further?
Nothing further on that one.
Okay.
I have a question. And there's a question, Dennis, stay up there. So I see we have 1,388 customers on Thrifty Watts. What's our goal? What's our maximum we could actually go for?
We estimate there's a market of about 3,000 to 4,000 out there.
3,000 to 4,000 a total? Sorry, I didn't mean to have you come down.
You didn't list it.
I'll list it.
Hi, Dennis Eisenbrown, Energy Services Manager. We kind of estimated, we looked at apartments, houses, how many people were, already had air conditioners, that sort of thing. And we think there's probably a market for 3,000 or 4,000 of these units out there, so.
And does it make a difference for us to have?
It does, yeah, that's one of the first targets those dispatchers control.
Yeah. Did we do that last week when it was so hot and humid?
We did, yes. Hopefully you didn't notice too much.
I did not know.
Good.
Cool. Thanks a
I
lot.
was sort of hoping you would. Anything further?
Nope, nothing further.
I mean, when they talked about these really good commissioners at the meeting, they didn't mention you at all, did they?
No, they never do. They never
But
do.
they did mention Les,
Well, apparently they mentioned less.
but not you.
No,
I'm surprised.
no, you're not. Say that like you meant it. Could we go on to item 8E, which is to accept the report on the Moorhead water supply? Chris, I'm assuming you're going to talk about our water supply.
That'd be correct. Casey's going to load up the presentation, and this was actually a presentation that was given to the council in early May, and it was a while ago. Dave gave a great intro to kind of some of our recent progress on water supply, and then we presented to the council. It was requested after that presentation to bring it back here, so my intent was to present the presentation as it was given to the council. Certainly, you've seen some of this material before. A lot of the material in respect to the Red River Valley Water Supply Project is new and updated to reflect recent engineering on the project. So we'll focus a little bit more on that than previous, but we'll dive right into the presentation. Feel free to stop me or ask me to expedite if needed. Just a brief overview. We're first going to touch on Moorhead's water supply in respect to really where Moorhead gets its water. We'll then look at some water demand in terms of future demand. How is Moorhead accommodating for future growth? How are we meeting water supply needs in respect of future growth? And then we'll look at long-term water supply. So what is our plan for long-term water supply and specifically a drought? So we've got really two drought options on the table, the Red River Valley Water Supply Project and the Buffalo Aquifer Expansion Project. Just to give you an idea where Moorhead's raw water comes from, our primary source water for Moorhead is actually Red River water, and this is really in stark contrast to a lot of the utilities in the Twin Cities metro area. Commissioner Regala and Norman brought up an article in the Pioneer Press about conserving water in the Twin Cities metro. So it's a big concern there where they're seeing some heavy groundwater withdrawals. Moorhead is unique and different in that we're using surface water, which is a more renewable type of water usage. So 80% of our water comes from the Red River. The remaining 20% comes from the Buffalo Aquifer and Moorhead Aquifer, with the Buffalo Aquifer being the primary drought resource for Moorhead. Just to give you an idea of the geography in terms of infrastructure relative to water supply, Moorhead's water treatment plant is actually located a couple blocks north of Buffalo Wild Wings in Moorhead. We have some wells located adjacent to our water treatment plant. That's the Moorhead Aquifer. We draw about 4% of our water from there. The primary source of water, the Red River intake, is located at 14th Avenue and River Drive in Moorhead. Several commissioners remember we recently rehabilitated that structure to accommodate for flooding events and prevention of infrastructure damage there. We also have two well fields on the Buffalo Aquifer. So the Buffalo Aquifer runs 30 miles north-south, about a mile wide. Our North Buffalo wells are actually on the northern extent of the Buffalo Aquifer. Our South Buffalo wells are right at the Highway 10 336 interchange there. You can see them as you drive by right alongside Highway 10. Just looking at our water supply withdrawals over the past 50, 60 years here, one thing to note on this slide, a couple things. The black represents our total withdrawal from all water sources, the Red River and then groundwater. Over the past 20, 30 years, we've seen really stable water supply withdrawals, and the reason for that, we've seen a lot of people conserving at home, installing point-of-use fixtures at home, water-efficient toilets, water-efficient shower heads, and then just not a lot of watering happens in Moorhead, so we don't see huge peaks in the summertime of water used for lawn watering. The other item of note on this particular slide is divergence of the red line and blue line about 1995. 1995, we installed our surface water treatment plant, constructed that plant, and that's really allowed for greater surface water usage of the Red River. So we now take about 1.2 billion gallons of Red River water every, sorry, 1.2 billion gallons of Red River water every year, where we used to take quite a bit more aquifer water in comparison. So really optimizing our plant and using more Red River water. Just looking at some of our water supply appropriations, wanted to give you an idea of how much appropriated water Moorhead has. The DNR in Minnesota actually governs how much water we can take from our respective sources and permits for our usage on those sources. Of particular note, there's a lot of information on this slide, but we have about 10 million gallons of capacity in terms of permitted use on the Red River. Actually, we only have 7 or so million gallons of capacity in terms of infrastructure. So in all of the cases, we have more permitted than our infrastructure will allow for pumping. So we have about 25.6 million gallons of permitted use between all of our water sources. We can actually only pump 12.78 of it. So quite a bit permitted. One other thing of particular note, some numbers that we'll talk about more going into the presentation. On the Buffalo Aquifer, we have about 8.5 million gallons of authorized use. That's 2 on the south and then 6.5 on the north. Those are some numbers that we'll see again in our modeling scenarios. And just to give you an idea of, again, kind of a summary of our raw water, our firm capacity, which is the largest water with the largest pump out of service, we have about 10.53 million gallons of firm water supply pumping capacity. So just a little bit more than the capacity of our water treatment plant, which is 10 million gallons. And if we had to go out and get additional permits on the Buffalo Aquifer, we'd go through an application process through the DNR that would take several years. Looking at our water demand projections, a couple things going on here. It's kind of a busy slide, but we did a couple different projections. One's a MetroCog projection based on 110 gallons per person per day, and the other is just a linear projection. So the blue line there is the linear projection. The purple line is the MetroCog projection. And what I'd like you to pay attention to is kind of what happens in 2040. In 2040, we get around 6.5 million gallons per day of average use. That's a significant number because we only have about 5.5 million gallons of pumping capacity on the Buffalo Aquifer there. So we have about a 1 million gallon shortfall in 2040 for an average day.
So this would mean if we went fully to the aquifer, right, we could only pump 5.5 million.
That's with existing infrastructure.
With existing infrastructure. But
Correct.
that would assume we have no water from the river, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yep, that's correct. And then we would exceed the capacity of the treatment plant in 2040 for peak day demand. So peak day demand approaches over 10 million gallons in 2040. So something we'll have to think about as water plant expansion at some point, in addition to obviously water supply expansion of some form. And in addition to kind of looking long-term for water supply planning, some of the things we need to think about for water supply are obviously drought. That's a big concern. Natural disaster and contamination. We need to have resilient infrastructure in place if we do have a contamination event. Over the past several years, we've had several contamination events on the Red River. We want to make sure we have adequate pumping capacity on the aquifer so that we can meet average day and max day demands if a long-term contamination event were to happen. Switching gears a little bit, we've used this slide before, but looking at the Palmer Index, just kind of a general index in terms of precipitation, and the way I frame this conversation is we're so used to thinking about floods, and we have been for the past 10 years. We forget about droughts, and in this slide, it's really clear. In the mid to late 80s, we had a pretty significant drought, and then, of course, the 1930s, we had a significant drought, a 10-year drought. And that 10-year drought was really the framework that we used to kind of model some of the scenarios on the aquifer to identify how much water we could sustainably pump out of the Buffalo Aquifer. And then, of course, this picture, which I really enjoy, just a picture of the Red River dry in the 1930s. There's several out there, but 800 consecutive days, according to a previous public works director in Fargo. So something we need to be cognizant of. Looking at some of our future water supply options, as I mentioned, 5.5 million gallons is our current groundwater capacity. In 2040, we'll be having a shortfall of 1 million gallon per day of average use and then 4.5 million gallons per day for max use. We're really looking at two options, the Buffalo Aquifer and the Red River Valley water supply project. In terms of Buffalo Aquifer expansion, we'll really start with that project and detailing some of the components of it. One thing that I wanted to highlight before we got into it is just that Moorhead Public Service has been a really good steward in terms of usage of groundwater. We've seen groundwater levels that have really increased and have increased significantly since that new surface water treatment plant was installed. Saving that much water has been significant for a couple reasons. On the Buffalo, we'd need about 10 billion gallons of water from the Buffalo for a long-term drought, and probably 4 to 6 billion gallons has been saved since that new surface water treatment plant has been installed. So a significant savings of groundwater that'll really kind of give us a good start if we had a long-term drought situation. Again, we'd need between 6 and probably 10 billion gallons of water. And when we started in 2015 on this project, we really were wondering, can the Buffalo Aquifer handle a long-term sustained withdrawal? And the best way for us to evaluate that in a cost-effective manner was through modeling. So what we did on the Buffalo is actually a couple different scenarios. We looked at what our existing infrastructure would do in terms of a worst-case scenario type drought, and then with the addition of some wells, could we achieve that 6.5 million gallon average day benchmark for 2040? That was a critical question in the modeling study. And then, let's look at a really worst-case scenario in terms of a max day demand. What can the aquifer safely yield? So the first study was the 2040 average day demand scenario, and this was with no rivers and the addition of one well field. And this was a really important point for us because we were able to identify that, yes, the addition of that well field will provide 6.5 million gallons for 10 years in a really harsh drought situation. So we would have that average day demand capacity met in 2040. The next scenario is kind of the really severe scenario, and this is meeting kind of akin to a max day demand. And the reason we stopped at 8.5 million gallons per day on this model was because that was the amount permitted with our existing permits. But what this model run really tells us is that the water is available to Moorhead Public Service to meet those max day or near max day demands for 2040. Obviously, there are other users, irrigators, and so forth that we need to be cognizant of. Some of those irrigators were incorporated into the model, but working with our partners in Clay County and some of the residents of Clay County is going to be an important piece moving forward. That's one of the components of the aquifer management plan that's currently being undertaken. Switching gears a little bit to the Buffalo Aquifer expansion in terms of what would the infrastructure look like. So we looked at a couple, actually 3 different alignments. This was done with internal staff looking at a couple scenarios. One of the tenets of the infrastructure assumptions was that we would use a drinking water revolving fund loan. We just recently used that for the high surface pump station. It's a great funding source. It's even cost competitive we get additional savings even with our good bond rating. We still get more savings using the drinking water revolving fund. And one of the kind of tenets of that funding source was that for the loan application, we'll actually have to replace the existing Highway 10 line that goes from our Highway 10 wells to our water treatment plant. That's one of the components that'll make our application more competitive for that particular application. So then the rest of the pieces for the project, some periodic O&M and some initial O&M, and then a little bit more contingency than probably we'd like, just because pretty undeveloped design right now at this point, but a total 40-year project cost of $25 to $27 million or so. And in terms of looking at the initial capital cost, interestingly, when we did a lot of this cost analysis back in 2015, we used Williston numbers for pipeline installation because that was the most current installation going on. Since that time, bid prices have decreased significantly, so from an initial capital perspective, we may see 10 to 20% savings on these estimates presented. So, we're still looking in that $15 to $22 million range, I would say, in terms of an initial capital cost estimate. So still a very expensive project, but one that we'll be looking at in the near future. Just briefly to go over some of the alignments that we've looked at for where the future well fields will be located. The first one is the most expensive option, the Sabin alignment. This one actually uses some existing easements that we have in place for electric transmission. That is the Sabin alignment. There's still some conflicts as you get into Moorhead. Then we looked at the South Buffalo alignment, which would use our existing pipeline alignment through Dilworth and basically tie on to our existing well field, use that alignment as we go through Dilworth, and then come to the water treatment plant. And then the last one is the North Buffalo alignment, which uses 15th Avenue North. We'd still tie into our existing well field on Highway 10 and then just go north on 15th Avenue North and cut to the west. Just to give you an idea of the timeline for expansion, the project could begin as early as 2020. We've got some of those capital budget numbers outlaid in our 10-year capital improvement plan right now. We could delay it a few years until we see some max day demands, but sometime in the very near future, we're going to have to pursue the project. In terms of what it would take from a rate increase perspective, we'll be looking at about 7.5% rate increases, so some very significant rate increases to fund the project. Switching gears to the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. This is the project that would use Missouri River water, take it from the north of Bismarck, the Washburn area, and take that water all the way to the Fargo-Moorhead area. One of the things that they've looked at pretty intensely recently is the alignments of the pipeline, utilizing existing easements that they have out there already. They've settled on what they think is a pretty good alignment for that pipeline, but there's still a lot of variability in the cost estimates. I have 0.9 to 1.6 billion, which I had in a presentation about a year ago. I don't think that number has really changed significantly. The actual cost is probably somewhere in the middle. A couple $100 million questions in there, namely, can we use the McCluskey Canal? A very important question. And then, if we can't use that, what kind of intake are we going to use? Are we going to use a horizontal collector well, or are we going to use a conventional intake? If we have to use horizontal collector wells, it's several $100 million adder. If we can't use the McCluskey Canal, several $100 million adder. So some open-ended questions that are still being worked on from an engineering perspective, but even with continued engineering, we're still going to have some big questions. I just wanted to give an idea on this slide how long this project has gone on. Really started in 2001, and it was originally envisioned as a federal project, so the federal government would subsidize 90% of the project. Local partners would subsidize 10%. And since 2012, really, the project has proceeded as a state-run project, i.e. the state of North Dakota is really running the project because the federal government did not give a record of decision on the project. So that's changed many of the project components and kind of what the outline and the long-term outlook is for the project. Kind of getting into the infrastructure of what the project would look like from a horizontal alignment and treatment plant perspective. This particular draft layout was presented to Ralph, Dave, and I believe, in early May. Garrison Diversion staff, we're kind of making the rounds, updating everybody on the project and kind of what the next steps are. There's still quite a bit of variability in terms of where the biota treatment plant is. You'll notice there's 3 particular options, and there's some political kind of wrangling as to where that biota treatment plant might go. But as I mentioned, the alignment itself is pretty well characterized and settled on. There's been some significant engineering in the water treatment plant component of the project. Basically, they've looked at quite a few options, and there's, as you can imagine, quite a few cost variability components to all of the different treatment options on the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. Basically, everything from just a simple treatment to treating it to surface water standards. And as you can imagine, treating it to surface water standards is very expensive. So we'll kind of look at the O&M cost, but if you make a treatment plant that treats the surface water standards, that's again probably a several $100 million adder to the project. So that's where that $0.9 to $1.6 billion range is so variable. One of the recent updates, this is a draft tech memo from Black & Veatch and Advanced Engineering. Pretty important milestone in the development of the engineering for the project in terms of outlaying some of the O&M costs for the project. And this was a big concern for me, especially when you consider the long-term operation expense of the project. When you look at the simple and complex, you can see there's a pretty significant range from about $1 million for simple, for just 4 CFS, to complex water treatment plant running all out at 180 CFS. We have a $16 million annual expense for O&M. So big range. What I tried to do to kind of accurately portray MPS's component cost share for O&M was I did a 30% allocation of running at 122 CFS in the simple model and 4 CFS for the rest of the year, i.e., we're running that plant in the pipeline hard in the summer for a few months, and the rest of it just sits at that 4 CFS idle, really just putting enough water through that pipeline to make sure it doesn't go stagnant. And I assumed in that projection that the state of North Dakota would pick up half of the cost for O&M. That's maybe a generous contribution on the state's part. I just assumed that there would be some contribution from the state. If they didn't pick up 50% of the O&M, the cost would be higher. As it stands, with all those assumptions in place, we're at about $90,000 per year of O&M cost. That would be MPS's share based on these numbers. So I had previously projected around $160,000, so slightly less, but again, there's a lot of play there in terms of if the state decides to contribute at all to that cost. Just wanted to outline the best and worst case scenarios for the total 40-year project cost. Looking at 4% interest rate on this with a traditional bond. One of the things along with the engineering, they are looking at what the future bonding options are. There's doing some external studies on how that would look. From the information I have today, that's the best assumption I can make. And then using some of the updated O&M numbers, we came up with a 32.2 best case scenario, $32.2 million project cost for the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. So with some of those assumptions in place, that cost came down from, I had initially projected about a year ago, probably $38 million, so slightly less than what I had originally projected, but still relatively close to what the original projection was. Worst case scenario with the cost variability, I kept it at $98.04 million for a worst case scenario. In terms of the project timeline, this is the most recent project timeline. They're still working on a lot of the preliminary engineering components of the project. They're hoping to have a final design and cost estimate end of 2018. They'll have to go back and get some more money from the state to complete that design. That's It still would be a pretty significant and spendy design to complete the rest of that. And then 2019 to 2024, they're looking at bidding and construction of the project to be a phased bidding and construction, because there's only a few contractors in the world that can really handle a pipeline of that size. So have to be really thoughtful about how they'll bid that particular portion of the project. Then just kind of wanted to do a side-by-side comparison of the Red River Valley Water Supply Project and the Buffalo Aquifer expansion. Really looking at kind of best case, worst case. I just wanted to bracket those numbers and put them side by side. Best case on either 32.2 for the Red River Valley Water Supply Project and 25.5 for Buffalo Aquifer. So those are the numbers. We've got some pretty significant next steps in terms of what we're going to do on the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. There's a deadline in October of this year for continuation of support on the project. It would be, if we agree to go forward with that agreement, it would be probably a $100,000 commitment on our part that would go towards future engineering on the project. So in the next commission meeting, we'll bring that agreement for your review and consideration, and then we'll likely be moving forward with a decision so that we can meet that October 1st deadline. So that's the timeline for kind of what the next steps are. I know I blazed through it pretty quick, but
yeah, you did. You had some very significant numbers. And a question that I have for you, Chris, in your conversations as of late, and given North Dakota's current budgetary issues, have there been discussions as to what the level of participation is going to be with the state? I mean, could this delay the project even further than what we're talking about?
I believe, from what I've heard, that there's 100 CFS of soft commitments on the project, and that's the threshold they need to continue the project. And so I believe, based on soft commitments, and I'm not, this is hearsay because I'm not sure what soft commitments really means, but they believe they have enough to meet the threshold for continuation of the project, they being the Garrison Diversion Conservancy District. So Ralph may have some insight as well.
Well, at the last meeting we had, I think they even talked about the commitment for the smaller pipe, because there's two pipe sizes, smaller and bigger. And it sounded like at that point, but they publicly said that they believe they have enough commitment, soft or otherwise, that would warrant a smaller pipe. But even at that last meeting, the question was the state's contribution, and will they, and to what degree? When we had a whole discussion on what should be asked for, should we ask for 90, 100%, or 80%? So I think that's the big question right now, is there money coming at all? And then for some of the interested parties, Moorhead included, is would the project cost and the 90%, or whatever the co-funding is from the state, include the tie-ins? For us, it would be the tie-in to Fargo somehow, either the Cheyenne or the water plant. For others up north of us, it would require repiping of certain pipes as well. So that's an open question there as well. And as Chris said, I mean, we're talking between 900 million and I think 1.8 billion was the most expensive version. That's a big gap, right? There's $900 million, and there's a lot of questions still open.
And I didn't make it very specific in my presentation, but I actually used a $1.2 million for the assumption, because that was a assumption that was verified by previous engineering, and it's kind of stood the test of time in terms of comparisons. So that was the cost I used, but obviously it could change very significantly.
It was very clear in the meeting as well. I mean, Grand Forks and Fargo are fully behind this project. I think Jamestown, which is not at the table yet for certain reasons, I think once they get to the table, they will be very much in favor of it as well. So my gut feeling is that at some point it may actually be built. The question is when and how much it's going to cost.
David? Just a couple of things. The Water Resource Fund in North Dakota is separate and really distinct from the operational budget conversation that they're having with the upcoming special session. So, that isn't, it's an apples and oranges sort of a budgetary thing. But that being said, the numbers certainly indicate the direction that I think we all are leaning with our decision-making that needs to happen over the next several weeks, a couple of months. But in that mix, and from our presentation in May with the City Council and the Mayor, it's important that in this in-between time here, we need to come back and have a conversation with our friends over there too. They're very interested in this question and what direction that we are intending to go with it. So I think, just for the sake of really good communication and such, we need to have that next conversation so that they know where we're pointed.
I think that's very important, especially locally and within our own community.
Along those lines, and I've said this before as well, if we decide to go the aquifer route, that aquifer needs to be protected, right? And that involves the city, the county, or counties, there may even be 2 counties involved at that point, to make sure that there is no event, that there is no spill of whatever it is that goes into groundwater, because that would be it. Right?
And we've had a history of protecting the aquifer, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. Okay, anything further, Chris?
I don't.
Members of the commission? Could I have a motion, please?
But there might be a
John?
question there.
Chris, as far as the projection that you had used here for the City of Moorhead use is based off of history and what potential usage that we would see. Yeah. We talked last month about the conservative conservation issue, or not issues, but approaches that White Bear have used. I would certainly encourage us, for whichever we go, to start some kind of education program for how do we conserve water. And they may have some already systems in place that we can copy or use to just continue doing that, because it just makes sense to be conservative of our resources.
Yeah. I can, we're updating our DNR water supply plan, and education regarding that particular topic is an important piece of that plan that we included as one of our action items for that plan. What that actually means, I can talk with Bill and follow up further on that.
Okay, anything further? Could I have a motion, please, concerning that report?
Move to accept the report.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. That brings us down to item 9, to approve a change order. Numbers 1 and 2 with PSC Avenia for the relocation of the 115 kV transmission line along 32nd Avenue South in West Fargo. Travis?
Hello.
Hi.
Travis Schmidt, Electrical Engineering Manager. Tonight I'm requesting approval of the change order number 1 and 2. Change order number 1 is for $19,981.17, and change order number 2 is for $52,582.50. We've separated these change orders out just due to the types of projects they are. They're all tied to the same contract. Change order number 1 is to clean up some outstanding items we have with Avenia for the relocation that we had for relocation based off of the widening of the 32nd Avenue in West Fargo. The crews just finally completed that, and due to delays in the project, we had some additional costs for traffic control, insurance bonding, and increased labor costs, and a couple other items as well. Of that $19,981, the split between Moorhead Public Service and City of West Fargo, MPS is going to pay about $5,100, and the City of West Fargo will cover $14,871. So that's based off the agreement we had in place with the City of West Fargo. The second change order for $52,000 is based off a request from Minn Kota. We signed an agreement a few months ago to take care of that with them, or with Minn Kota. The reason for that is Minn Kota requested us to raise our transmission line abutting to the existing project that we had in place with West Fargo. The reason they needed to request us to raise our line is they are putting in a new double circuit 115 kV transmission line that runs north and south on Veterans Boulevard, and we have requested reimbursement for that in full from them as is standard practice. So of that $52,000 that we're requesting tonight, Minn Kota will pay all those costs for that too.
Okay. Any questions? Could I have a motion, please?
I move approval of item 9.
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. That motion carries. Item 10 is an assignment of the 20th Avenue tank land lease agreement. Who's speaking to this, and is it necessary?
I can speak to this. Kind of a brief item. H&S Contracting recently purchased some land in the Carr Industrial Park for their further expansion. They currently own some land next to our 20th Avenue tank and lease about a half acre of land from us. Because they're no longer going to maintain, they just recently sold that property next to our tank. They want to assign the lease to the new owner of the property, which will be Cash Rental, also known as Cash Concrete. They'll be operating out of that space, and so we'll start an updated lease agreement with Cash Concrete, Cash Rental.
Okay. Any discussion? Could I have a motion, please?
I move approval, item 10.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, the same sign. That motion carries. Item 11 is to approve action whereby we concur with the City of Moorhead in the City Council resolution accepting the offer on the sale of $12,723,000 worth of public utility revenue bonds. Nancy?
Nancy Lund, Admin and Finance Manager. Just a refresher, a couple months we started on the process of going into the market to sell bonds to finance a number of our projects. So the $12 million includes over $8 million for the extension and acquisition for the Oakport service area, so about $8.4 million there. We also threw in a little bit of water main replacement that we're going to finance, 1.1 or 1.2 million, and a couple other projects on the electric side, master plan improvements to substations and things like that. So that's what we're going to use that money for. And the first step in that process then is going out and getting an updated bond rating, and we've talked about that a little bit. So we were successful in talking with Moody's, and we're able to maintain the current AA3 rating, which we were proud of a few years ago too. Moody's last night, when they talked with the council a little bit, did make a point that it is rare for a utility to have as good a credit rating as the city, because our bonds are backed by the revenues of the utility. When the city sells bonds, they're general obligation bonds, and they usually have a higher rating. In this case, we've been able to meet that rating also, so something to be proud of that we've got the higher rating. What that means to us in terms of dollars and cents is a savings on our interest rate when we sell the bonds.
The question that I have, part of this is for the Oakport acquisition. Are we including XL Energy in that?
Yes, yes. So we bonded, the Oakport upgrade or installation was actually 3 phases. So we did about a $700,000 phase in 2015. So the start of the feeder line up a ways up past American Crystal, I think. So that's included in that. All of the Red River acquisition and extension services this year, and the Excel monies next year. So I think it's between $1.5 and $2 million of next year's improvements too. So it will cover the whole project.
Okay.
So yeah, the reason we do the credit rating is to save some money on interest rates. And as we go through and look at the actual bids on that, we'll talk about how much we're saving because of that increased credit rating there. And Moody's did, I think we talked about them a little bit. They talked about the strengths. I mean, as we talk with them, I mean, definitely the Commission's ability to set the rates and their willingness to set the rates is a big factor when we talk to Moody's. They like to see that control. A couple of the things we've done since the last time we went to Moody's that we talked about in detail with them was the fact that we now have a purchase power adjustment rate that we include in our rate schedule every year. So it allows us the ability to raise rates if purchase power costs go above a certain percentage of increase. That would be an unplanned for increase. So instead of going through a rate hearing and everything, we've got a formula in there. And that came out of the Moody's rating analysis. So we did adopt that rate. The other big item that we made a financial change on was, as we already discussed, the transfer agreement. So even though we haven't been able to stabilize that agreement, we've slowed the rate of increases on that, and that's a big factor to them. We also discussed about the fact that the transfer is now calculated based on kilowatt hour sales instead of dollars of revenue. So as dollars of revenue go up to cover things like purchase power costs and things like that, it doesn't necessarily equate to an increase in transfer. So they actually requested a copy of that transfer agreement, so we sent that to them ahead of time. So they've had a chance to review that. And so the implementation of the purchase power adjustment and the transfer were 2 big items that contributed to to the retaining the good rating.
And I think one of the comments, and John alluded to it just a little bit ago, relative to the transfer, that they will also keep their eye on any increases in that transfer as it impacts our rating going forward. So it's important for everybody to understand how important that particular aspect of our business is to us and obviously to our ratepayers. And at the same time, I cannot say it often enough that the ability to put that agreement together with our liaisons and our budget committee is wonderful. It's good for the
Moody's
city.
was pleased to see that, and thank you to all those that worked on that also.
Absolutely.
The second part of the information I wanted to relay this evening was just the bids that were received by Springstead yesterday morning at 11 o'clock. So they received 6 bids, and in those 6 bids, there were actually 39 financial institutions that participated in those bids. So some of those had many partners working together to create a bid. So we had 6 bids that ranged from interest rates of 2.415 up to 2.52%. Moody's had estimated about a month ago an interest rate on our bond sale of 3.34%, so we were almost 1% below their original estimates. So that will save us about $1.2 million over the next 20 years. So a huge piece, a huge, huge, huge piece for us. And the credit rating from being a AA3 compared to a A1 rating over the next 20 years will save us in the range of $350,000 to $500,000 on interest too. So by having that credit rating up there where we have it, we're again saving money there. So it's important to maintain that, and I think, you know, our approach on that would be to see if we can do a little bit better the next time we go in the market, which would be 4 years down the road.
That's your challenge, Nancy.
That's a challenge, yeah.
That's your mission, should you choose to accept it.
Yeah, so we will work on that, but a really good showing. Moody's said, I mean, the market was hungry for utility bonds, and so we hit the market at a good time too. So good news for us all around this week.
Well, as everybody has said, job well done by you and your staff, and by everybody who's been involved in all of these financial matters on behalf of Moorhead Public Service in the city of Moorhead.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could we have, are there any questions? Could I have a motion, please, concerning this item? Okay. John, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, the same sign. That motion carries. I don't think we're going into closed session. Anything else to come before this august body? John?
Last month, we talked about establishing a tour for some facilities. Has that been looked at?
A which?
A tour.
A tour, okay.
So I don't know if Bill was going to do that or where that was left, but that's something that we wanted to get put in place. So if you could just follow up on that.
Yeah, go ahead, Les.
I might suggest that it be held until October, because we have a new commissioner starting 1st of October, and that would be good for her to be part of. It's just a suggestion.
It'd be good to take some of our old commissioners with us too, Les.
Take old commissioners with too.
Yeah,
Or, you know, if it's scheduled prior to that, we certainly could invite her.
absolutely. And the same with members of the council. I think the last time we did one of those tours, we didn't have too much participation in that regard, but it would be a good idea for us to all understand what we have. And I know, John, you've never taken that particular tour, so.
So, looking for a little bit of direction in terms of what we're thinking for a tour. Are we talking about maybe a grid tour, or I think it wasn't quite clear from the last meeting.
It's been years since we've had the grid tour.
Okay.
As Bob Swenson used to call it.
Sure.
And Oakport was,
I think at the very least, we should be going out and taking a look at what our facilities are in Oakport, seeing how good or bad a job Joe has done out there, and, you know, seeing what's happening with all of that, and at the same time, acquainting ourselves with what we have. And, you know, that may involve everything that's going on, you know, south by the interstate too, and all the work that you're doing out there. I mean, there are a lot of things that are happening in terms of our facilities that not all of us have seen. Heidi? Or was it Casey?
Both of us. What's your
That's really
priority?
special.
What's your top priority? You want to do a grid tour first, you can see what's going on in Oakport, and then down the road an aquifer tour? Because they can't both be done same night. It would take a long time.
Okay.
But I just want to make sure I understand your priorities. And then we also have an open house scheduled for the high service pumping station and the solar projects for October 4th. So we'll probably do water plant tours that night of inside the water
Okay.
plant as well, like on a half an hour basis or something like that.
Well,
So,
let's have staff look into this, please.
thanks for the direction.
Well, John, priority-wise,
Does John have something he
We
wants?
have done the water plant here as far as.
Yep, last year you did the water
last
plant,
year.
yep.
Therefore- But my thought would be is to look at actually the infrastructure and what we have
Okay.
in place. As we talked last month.
electrical or water?
Right, it's
I think
about
that's
2
what
hours each.
Okay. Well, my thought with that is since we are dealing with a significant water
Okay.
decision,
Okay.
water would be probably my
Okay.
first thought,
Okay,
because just to see what we have, and that would help us.
okay. Based on the
Support our
timing
decision.
of the decision that needs to be made, do you want to do it before Les's term is up, or is it okay to wait?
Well, it's okay either way, and I think
Okay.
what we should do is contact the new commissioner and see if
Oh,
she
yeah,
would
we
like
could
to.
do that. We could do it
if
before
we
she
can
starts.
accommodate it ahead of time, we can do that as well.
Okay,
I'm going to argue
You always
sooner
do.
than later.
Okay,
Because
that's
we've got
what I
a
was
decision to
asking.
make, because
Okay.
they're, Lau is expecting a decision from us.
Exactly.
So I don't think we can wait till September to do this, because we got some
okay.
process.
I will get in contact with the upcoming commissioner, and we'll see what we can work out
Yeah.
there.
I would say one in August, one in September. Let's pick 2 dates and we do one and one.
Sure, because I'd like to see our work,
Yeah.
Joel's work up in Oakport. You know, I am not as familiar with the Oakport project as I feel I should be.
Well, and Joe has told us how good work he really does, so.
Well, he's told us that.
Thank
I'd love
you.
to see it, yeah.
But the other thing that would be interesting too, when we do the water tour, is maybe to, as you explained to us, Chris, that we're going to go south to save, and maybe even go south and have people realize that that is not a 1 mile project, right? Maybe look at some sites down there to say, okay, this is where the next field would be and the field after that.
So that may include a view of the aquifer, particularly for our newer members, to see where those areas are that, quite frankly, could become an area of contamination very easily. And so I think that's important.
If we could get the manager, the city manager.
Yes. So Les, you don't mind him arguing with you?
Dave and I never argue.
We have a discussion.
You do. Whatever Dave would like is
Well,
fine with
It
me.
used to be Casey, now it's Dave. Okay.
Well, and again,
Whatever Dave and Casey want to arrange is
We-
fine with me.
there are a number of people expecting a decision from us on it.
Yes,
and-
there are.
And we need to make one, because it's going to be a big
And we
bill
should
if
be
we
doing
don't.
that as soon as
Do
we...
it in August.
Yeah.
There you go, Casey.
Do water.
Water in August.
You want somebody to decide? There you go. August, water.
I love it when he decides. Okay? Anything further? Our meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.